we're finding our own social environment too difficult to cope with, what's it like for an animal that doesn't have the ability to rationalise?
So they could even quantify how much of an impact this was having on the dog's lifespan.
A lot of people, I think, can unwittingly maintain a state of chronic stress, fear within a dog.
And allowing them to build a bit of a resilience towards that stress is the only possible way out.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sab Cohen-Hatton. I'm a neuroscientist specialising in human and animal learning mechanisms.
I'm Jamie Penrith. I specialise in canine predatory behaviour and I'm also a former police dog handler.
And I'm Danny Wells. I'm a dog trainer that specialises in unwanted behaviour.
And every week we sit down to chat about the latest research in canine psychology.
And more importantly, how you can apply it to your own dog to get to know them even better.
Welcome to the Dog Scholar.
Fantastic.
There you go. Guys, let's go dramatic.
I've got a question.
Yes, you have.
I do.
Why did Danny's opening sound like Welcome to Jurassic Park?
To Jurassic Park.
Wow.
What is your question? What is your question,
Wow, well, you pair of velociraptors, you. My question is a very good question.
Good boy.
My question's a good question this week, I think. My question is, do stress dogs die sooner?
Oh, serious question.
It is a serious question. There's you giving it some.
I know.
I had a very serious question.
It's been popular over the last couple of years. Dying soon is popular. It's been addressed that in people over the last couple of years about like stress being a big killer in people. So one would surmise it would be similar in dogs.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're talking about like prolonged stress. Obviously we understand that it's important even as people that we push through, minor stresses. You might be stressed revising for an exam, but good things are on the other side of adversity. We're talking about really prolonged stress here, aren't we?
Yeah, stress can be a motivator as well. You feel uncomfortable, so you push yourself harder to get yourself out of the discomfort. Yeah, but if you're talking about prolonged stress, chronic stress, we know that in people we've seen research that suggests it can have negative impacts on our health and our welfare, and it can even shorten our lifespans. So I was really interested to know whether it has the same effect on dogs. Do stressed dogs die sooner?
I would imagine.
I
would imagine, without hearing the research that you're undoubtedly going to go through, that it doesn't really matter what the animal is. If you're talking about a prolonged
chronic stress,
chronic stress,
Not good,
that it can't be any good on the psychological
and
or physical health.
even if the science says that they don't. What kind of life is living a life full of chronic stress?
Well,
you know what I mean?
Psychological stress, the stress that you're experiencing, can also result in a physiological stress response. So it changes things in your body. You feel it in your body. So, for example, you have changes in your hormone system and your immune system that can have a negative effect on your life. And studies have shown generally that a single acute stressor, something really bad that you experience and you find incredibly stressful, can lead to long-term neurochemical changes in your body. So it can affect basically the chemical messengers that you have in your body permanently. It can have a really, really lasting impact. Now, with many species, it's been linked with diseases and a shorter lifespan. And in humans, we know that high levels of cortisol that you get from chronic stress are associated with things like obesity and heart disease and problems with your immune system as well. So the study that I found decided to look at whether stressed dogs died sooner than dogs that were more generally relaxed. Now, owners of dogs that died within the last 5 years, just to be clear, it was the dogs that had died, not the owners, otherwise that'd be a really difficult person to contact to participate in the study. These owners whose dogs had died within the last 5 years were asked questions about their dogs. And they were asked questions about their dogs' behaviours and their training and their dogs' personalities, as well as their health and the cause of their dog's death. And there were a few things completely unrelated to fear that affected their lifespan, like weight, neutering as well, interestingly, and dying in an accident, right? So the final analysis kind of took those bits out. It controlled for those bits so that you didn't get an effect that was caused by something else, something unrelated. Now, what they found, believe it or not, is the more well-behaved the owner reported the dog to be, the longer it lived. And you might think, well, that's because dogs that had really difficult behaviours due to stress were put down.
What's really going on?
Yeah. But in fact, it was actually older dogs that were more likely to be euthanized for problem behaviours. So it's not necessarily that the dogs with serious behavioural problems were being put down more often, and that's why they were
Sometimes
dying more.
serious behavioural problems can be a good sort of form of stress, like an arousal. It doesn't necessarily equate to like really would you say acute stress?
Yeah, like chasing behaviours and things like that, chasing things.
Arousal and stress.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? Dogs that were afraid of strangers died sooner. So there was a fear thing that came into this. And in fact, on average, they lived half a year less. So they could even quantify how much of an impact this was having on the dog's lifespan. And that's fear, isn't it?
So fear-related stress specifically.
Yeah. Now, dogs that were afraid of things like cars or objects or noises, and dogs that had separation anxiety also had more skin problems than other dogs.
That makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's similar in humans, isn't it?
I get the same. I get neurodermatitis.
Yeah, because stress affects the function of the epidermal barrier, the skin barrier, and it leaves you more open to infections, you know? So there's a real...
You just learned something, haven't you?
Yeah.
Skid barrier, I thought it was something that you get on a motocross track.
Yeah. Skin barrier.
Barrier.
Yeah.
Epidermal.
That is something you get on a motocross.
Oh, he's taking that corner a bit more, he's going to hit the epidermis.
Yeah. And interesting, there was no difference in lifespan with dogs who lived with other dogs or just with their humans. So that bit didn't make an impact. But certainly that fear-related, those fear-related behaviours did affect the dogs. I mean, you think about separation anxiety as well. That's a fear, isn't it? They're afraid of being left alone. You know, they're pining back for their owners. They're frightened. So all of these things...
It's a fear that they can't cope by themselves.
It's chronic, isn't it? Because they're experiencing these things daily.
Yeah.
So it becomes a chronic stressor. Yeah. And that was definitely having an impact on their life.
It makes sense, you know, when I'm stressed. Like I said, I get neurodermatitis. I also get like a cold sore and things like that. So there's, you know, physical changes going on, obviously dictated by hormone regulation and so on and so forth in my body. So it makes sense that the dog would, any mammal would suffer the same. It completely makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I like you were saying with, you know, the way that it affects you in terms of skin, you know, I get, and I've suffered from, as far as I can remember in my life, what we call white coat anxiety. So in a medical setting...
I've got a white coat.
My stress, well, I don't ever want to see it because it sets my... internally sets my stress response off to the point that I can feel my heart rate pound, I can feel and measure my blood pressure rise dramatically when I'm in a medical setting, even though I'm well aware of it, even though I can rationalise it, even though I know that it's just a conditioned association, I am unable to physically, do anything about it. The life that we lead now, you know, anxiety, stress, you know, mental health issues within people is certainly, it's more talked about, isn't it? It's more recognised and it's more accepted. Do you not think it's inevitable that if we're taking a dog and putting a dog into those sort of situations, if we're finding our own social environment too difficult to cope with, what's it like for an animal that doesn't have the ability to rationalise
or understand everyday social norms? It's a human being's world.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, one thing that I do see a lot of, and I have to say, is these kind of like promises of a quick fix. You almost see people selling snake oil, don't you? If your dog takes this supplement, it's no longer going to be stressed. And I mean, look, there's a place for psychotropic medication in some circumstances when recommended by a vet, but there are lots of people selling things that, you know, you put this supplement in your dog's food and all will be well, they'll be calm. And actually, I mean, I'm not a fan of that at all, frankly. And for me, it's not real, is it? You're not teaching a dog how to cope.
What you find with a lot of those things in the small print, and even with the, veterinary prescribed sort of like heavily researched medications, is alongside a behaviour modification program, when taken in conjunction with training, things like that. So
because just to be clear on that, the psychotropic medication can bring down the stress enough for the dog to learn something new.
I'm working with the German Shepherd, but one of my trainers is I've had to sit on it because it was quite complex.
What, you sat on the German Shepherd?
Working with the
German
Shepherd.
Trainer.
Yeah. One of my trainers is working with a a case similar, extreme separation anxiety. I can think of maybe 2 or 3 over 10 years that I've recommended to, but I've said, psychotropic medication is definitely going to help this. It'll take an edge off while we can implement some structure and a training program. I think we're about maybe 6-7 weeks in now. The dog's a different dog.
Wow.
It just took the edge off, but then you get people that are thinking, I'm just going to put them on medication and it's done. There is still work that needs to be made.
Just to be clear, psychotropic medications are essentially medications that will have a calming effect on the dog.
Like the situation, like you said before, about, dogs who are, have chronic stress over traffic or people. If you're not taking the time to subject them to a lower version of that, and teach them to build a resilience, you're setting them up for a massive chronic stress, amount of chronic stress for life rather than temporary stress to feel better. There's a big difference between subjecting your dog to mild stress with the end goal of building a resilience towards that stress. By teaching it how to cope and that everything is fine. Compared to flooding the dog, being taking them way too far too soon where they can't rationalise everything.
And they get overwhelmed.
And they get too overwhelmed to make any sorts of association.
Yeah, I think that's right. And do you know what? I think there's something about how we are at the moment as well. We've seen much higher levels of anxiety and stress in people post-COVID, post-lockdown. And as we're now living in a cost of living crisis, things are stressful for a lot of people. We know how dogs read us. We know how good they are at recognising the cues from our reactions, from our responses. That awareness point is a really important one, probably now more so than ever before.
Yeah. And especially since now society's view on dogs is this anthropomorphic outlook, the humanisation of dogs. Then if we're humanising dogs and we're breeding more and more dogs, that we're probably going to take them down with us and create some, neurotic stresses.
It's really important to speak to your vet, to get information from your vet. What is causing my dog to be anxious? If your dog has got skin problems, you might just be thinking, well, I'll just treat the skin problems. Yeah. But as we've seen, for example, things like that happen more often in stressed dogs. So the root cause might be much deeper than the cause of the symptom that you're looking at.
Any responsible dog trainer, if they see anything that is out of the ordinary, like I've done it myself, I told you 3 times off the top of my head I can think of it and go, need some vet help here. This is a very serious behaviour. The dog is not, we can't really find a baseline that we can subject the dog to allow them to inoculate, to build resilience. So you're going to need a little bit of help here.
There's so much that we could talk about with this. And after the break, we'll be right back with some practical advice on what you can do if your dog is feeling stressed and anxious, along with some listener questions. Welcome back. We've got some great practical advice for you. So, gentlemen, what can people do if their dogs are feeling stressed and anxious?
The first thing that you need to recognise with your dog is, whatever the behaviour, whatever the situation, dogs are always less stressed when they can predict outcomes. Taking the time to allow your dog to make information in the world that you live in relevant is going to be a massive leap forward when you're dealing with to prevent these sorts of behaviours.
Sometimes there are situations where when I know, if I have a dog, for example, that won't leave the living room because it doesn't like the floor surface outside, and I've spent, shiny floors. Some dogs do. Some dogs don't like particular floor surfaces. They won't walk on them. They'll move away from them.
Quite common.
They don't like an area of the household. They don't like an area outside of the household. I feel the same when I'm wearing
stilettos.
So there's
but you still wear them.
Because I face my fear and I do it anyway.
Right, so you have these as an owner of a dog, and as a trainer who works with owners of dogs, and I'm sure that Danny had backed me up on this because I'm paying him. No, provided that I know, and provided that the owner knows, that the fear that the dog holds, okay, so say my fear is walking alongside a curb where there is traffic moving and I just balk. I won't go, I back into the lead and I want to go away. Now, if that lead is secure and that lead is attached to the dog, I will walk you towards it, and I will stand. I won't take you straight into the threshold where you're as in close enough to the traffic where you're absolutely terrified, but I will allow you to experience the fact that what you're feeling is unnecessary. It's unwarranted because the dog is being trapped by its own anticipatory stress in terms of what it expects to happen in that situation. Now, by showing them heavily scientifically researched, I'm sure you'd be able to pull this up, but heavily scientifically researched, if I can show you that and allow you to experience that stress that you feel, go through it and realize nothing happened.
Yeah.
It was unwarranted.
And do you know
It's a
what
bit-
powerful
Unless
thing?
I get to the other side,
Yeah.
how am I ever going to learn that it's safe to cross?
It's
Exactly.
like controlled exposure therapy.
Controlled
Yeah, it
exposure
is, yeah.
So
therapy,
we
which
have
is
human equivalents of this. So if somebody has a phobia, say, for example, of spiders, then one way to treat that is to give them very controlled exposure to spiders. Now, no one's going to rock up with a tarantula and stick it straight on your
it's just-
face.
it's
That would be too
desensitisation,
much.
isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly that. You start off with a spider outside the room, but you know it's there. Then you might bring the spider in
Yeah,
a box
yeah, yeah.
inside the room, and you work up to it, and you sit and you hold that discomfort feeling. You know, it's very similar when you're dealing with people who have obsessive compulsive disorder. One of the ways of doing the therapy for that is for someone to not give in to their compulsion, but sit there with the discomfort, sit there with the stress until it subsides.
Yeah.
And then the next time you do something a little bit further and a little bit further again. It's that controlled exposure, and it's the same with dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely busting at the seams here because
Come on, Danny.
I want to add to that.
Get it in.
There's also this notion of we need to give treats to everything. And when people come to me with dogs who are let's use Jamie's example, fear of traffic, all they've done is they've gone to many trainers and they've stood well away back from it, firing rewards. And the dog takes rewards, but every time they get to this distance, doesn't take rewards anymore. What people forget is the absence of an unpleasant outcome is a reward in itself. So the dog, in other words, the dog goes, oh, nothing bad happened to me then. Nothing bad happened then. Let's do that again. And obviously, we're going to be methodical about how soon we start getting closer and closer to the traffic. So you can't reward your way out of irrational fear. Dogs don't want to take rewards when they're in a heightened state of fear.
There's a really good bit of advice here that it might not be great if your dog is experiencing that to just try it yourself.
No, not at all.
You need a trainer, you need someone that has that experience that
Exactly.
can recognise
Exactly.
when
And-
it's going to be too much for your dog, so that you don't inadvertently cause more damage.
And keeping in the line with practical tips, motion is your best friend. When people experience that
It's very moving.
Yeah. When people experience,
Apart from if your stuff was seasick.
when
then it's not your friend.
when people experience their dogs shutting down through fear, they often tell me, "Oh, what do you?" I say, "What do you do?" "Oh, I just stop and tell them it's okay, it's okay." All you're doing is allowing that dog to do nothing but fixate on the fear. I'm not saying plough into traffic with your dog, but what I am saying is take into consideration that level of threshold, as we've explained before, and keep that motion going, keep the dog in motion.
As people, we would always recognise that sometimes you've got to push through discomfort to get to the other
100%.
side. It's about resilience, isn't it?
Every
You
exam
do
that anybody
difficult-
takes.
Yeah, you do difficult things and you come out the other side stronger for it. That's the foundation of resilience. But with our dogs, we're less likely to do that. We're going to try and soothe them. We're going to go, oh, they're there, it's all okay. Meanwhile, inadvertently reinforcing the behaviour. And we love our dogs so much that we don't want them to experience anything bad. But if the reality is they're experiencing something stressful daily that's exposing them to so much stress physiologically within their bodies that they're going to die sooner as a result, well, actually, it's incumbent on us to be able to help them through that.
Yes, it is.
And the way that you help them through that isn't necessarily by trying to soothe them when they feel stressed, but about teaching them that the thing that they're anxious about isn't a reason to be anxious and they don't have to be. And then teaching them how not to be anxious.
That doesn't mean that we're believing that you can reinforce an emotion. Your dog's not aware of its emotional state, but with the attempt to soothe, what we're saying is your dog feels stress, you run in to soothe, that becomes an unhealthy coping strategy, and your dog now his response is to turn in and take the soothing feeling rather than deal with the stress. We're not suggesting that we're reinforcing your dog's, emotional state as they're not aware of it. We're just making it clear that you can inadvertently give them a unhealthy coping strategy and not cope with that particular situation.
There's also something really important, isn't there, about helping your dog to predict things, which reduces stress.
Predicting
'Cause
outcomes.
Uncertainty really affects dogs, doesn't it? So you can help them by establishing structure, establishing boundaries within your house, within the place that the dog spends most of its time.
If you
that will
take
help
anything from this episode, take that one thing of your dog will always cope better when it can predict an outcome.
Do you know what I predict? I predict listener questions.
Are dogs happier when there are other pets in the house? It depends which pet you're talking about.
Yeah.
The mouse loves it when you've got 3 cats.
Yeah.
It's like you know, your dog's an individual. You will know more than us if you. It's quite obvious to see if your dog's happy in a certain situation around other animals or if they're not.
Well, it's interesting because when my daughter kept rats, she had 2 rats, and the dogs loved it because they saw the rats as prey. So we
Yeah,
had
yeah.
to spend a lot of time managing the environment to make sure neither of them would meet. But the frustration that the dogs would experience when they'd be outside her door, scratching at the door, smelling the rats, wagging their tail, getting really, really aroused, knowing that they'll never be able to fulfill that because I can't let them in because they'll eat the rats. That's a bit stressful. So I can argue, whilst they might like having the rats there because they want them, the very act of not being able to get them is a little bit stressful.
I reckon they were
So
just.
don't think
I
they're
reckon they were
happier.
just absolutely amazed that you could get them ex-inhalers so small.
You're so
I reckon that question
mean.
will have been asked by somebody who perhaps has been told, get another dog for your dog that
Yeah.
you've got at the moment because it will
Yes,
make your dog
yeah.
at home happier.
Yeah.
Not
No,
necessarily
if your
the
dog's
case.
not happy at home, that's a problem that you're
Yeah,
going to
it
have
is.
to address. You
Yeah,
can't
it
fix it by giving the dog another
Throwing
dog.
more fuel
Otherwise,
on a fire,
as explained in the grief episode, you run the risk of having dogs that are, let's say, pair bonded together, and when you lose one, you're going through a world of problems with your dog through that loss and the change of environment.
How might you know if your dog isn't happy with another pet?
It can cause outbursts of aggression. It can cause complete avoidance. They don't want to engage. There's many
Just
ways.
a suppression
Yeah.
of general behaviours. As I say, most
Low
owners
mood,
would be able
low mood,
to... Yeah,
reluctance to eat, trying to stay in a separate room all the time.
You
There's
talked
many,
about
many things.
avoidance. Have you got an example of avoidance, what that looks like?
Yeah,
in a
so you
dog?
could be sat there with one dog and let's say it's another dog, for example. The other one comes over, they walk away straight away. The one dog has a
Oh,
sniff,
I do
they
that
turn
to
away.
people sometimes.
Yeah, I do this to people all the time. It could even be
just
something-
common sense.
It could be as subtle as the other dog showing some appeasement and sniffing in the direction, and they're just turning away and yawning and ears back, lip licking, lip smacking.
Oh, I
You know,
don't sniff at people.
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
will walk
I
away.
think if you're thinking about it and you get the opportunity, it's always a great idea if you can to be able to give it a trial run first of all.
Oh, yeah.
And seeing what you're getting before you take the plunge.
Yeah, we did with Red. Red came into an established
Yeah.
2-dog household, our 3rd dog Red, so we took her for a trial to make sure that she got on with the other dogs and the other dogs got on with her, and so it didn't change the dynamic. And we introduced them really carefully, and once it works, and you're never going to let the dog go,
I will
are you?
say it's always a lot easier. Like for Sabrina's example, if you've got a multiple dog household, they're all males. It's always going to be a lot easier introducing a bitch than it is another male.
Yeah, and I think
And likewise.
when you
Yeah.
introduce that new pet, it's a little bit like dropping a pebble into a pond. You'll get ripples amongst the actual social dynamic, but they should settle. If you remain, you end up with permanent sort of unsettled waters, something's not right.
So on the flip side, how do you know if your dog's lonely?
Well, that's a big question. Well, most dogs, if they're in a decent relationship with a owner that they have, and they're well satisfied in terms of their behavioural needs, their individual and species specific requirements, then loneliness really isn't
I don't
something
think
that
I've
I
ever.
see.
I don't think I've ever looked and thought that dog's lonely.
The only time
just
I
don't
really
think
see
so.
that, or the only time I really hear of that, is when you get certain rescue organisations, on a sort of like marketing appeal, saying we have the loneliest dog in Britain that we've kept in a kennel for 11
think
years.
to suggest that your dog's lonely, your dog is reflecting on past experiences, and they just don't do it. They live for the moment.
But equally, dogs are a social species, aren't
Yeah,
they?
they
So
are.
they need interaction. There's something about, though, making sure that you're fulfilling your
Right.
dog's needs
Yeah,
by
fulfilling
interacting
your
with
dog's
dog.
needs can create.
Doesn't need
If you're not
another pet
fulfilling your dog's
necessarily.
needs, and they are social, and there's no social aspects to the life, you're going to see a dip in mood. But your dog's not going to be lonely per se.
Yeah.
Here we go, question 2. Ready for this one?
I was born ready,
Is
Jamie.
tail wagging a reliable indicator for humans on the dog's state?
It is.
Is the tail wagging the dog?
It's as reliable as your ability to read. So, two plain examples are a dog can wag when it's happy to see you, but a dog can also wag when it's ready to give you a good biting. You know what I mean? Or preparing itself for battle.
Yeah, my
Fighting.
my dog goes over to see another dog, and my dog's tail's up like this,
Erect and shuddering fastly.
like a flag flapping in the wind.
Yeah. We're
That's
not
not
having
a
that.
dog that's happy.
That's
That's
not
a
a
dog that's
happy
in a
tail.
high state of
Yeah,
arousal
yeah.
that's very likely
Yeah.
to go into a behaviour that you're not particularly
And that's
making
really
themselves
important.
bigger. If a dog wagging its tail and broadening its chest out and holding its head high,
Stiff, standing
it's not
stiff
the
and
same
erect
as
and beginning to
a wagging tail that is accompanied by a wagging arse.
or a
You
little
know what I
wee on
mean?
the ground and a roll over on
Yeah.
showing your belly and
Yeah.
So there is something that's important about not assuming assuming that just because a dog's tail is wagging, that it's going to be happy and friendly. Great questions, as always. I love questions, don't you?
I do like questions.
Should we get some more questions?
Fire them to us at Dog Scholar Podcast on our social media outlets, or alternatively, if you don't want to do that, you can always email us at podcast@thedogscholar.com.
Danny.
You want some icks, don't you?
Ick me.
I'm sensing some ick vibes. Right? I'll give you the ickle one.
Ick me like a lollipop,
Give me an ickle
Danny.
one.
Ick me like a lollipop.
Okay.
Ick me with your rhythm stick.
Okay, well,
Ick me.
I've been a little bit off the ball today because I forgot to get locations, but oh well, we've got Andy here. Andy from wherever Andy is from says, people who buy harnesses to stop their dogs pulling. So yeah, harnesses aren't ideal for a dog that pulls. It makes it very comfortable for a dog to pull, and it'll aid what we, something called opposition reflex, the act of if something is under a force in one direction, it will naturally want to oppose that force in the other direction. So when you put your dog in a harness, it's extremely comfortable to do that. And the more you feel that pull and resist the pull, the more the pull happens. You can perpetuate the problem of pulling. Ignore any of the adverts of no pull harnesses. They don't actually exist. Yeah. They don't make dogs pull, but they do aid it and increase the likelihood of make it more comfortable for a dog to pull. Jamie?
What I would say, Andy, and to anybody else, you want to put a harness on your dog, put a harness on your dog. No problem at all. Absolutely. Horses for courses, harnesses for dogs if that's what you want them to be. But, the way that we're dog training and everything has gone as far as Danny and I will see is that equipment isn't necessarily gearing towards teaching the dog how to walk nicely, but more towards making it more comfortable for an owner to walk a dog that hasn't been taught how to walk nicely to do so.
Yeah, which is another thing to mention. You might be happy with your dog pulling, but you won't be happy on a -10 day with black ice everywhere. So just be very careful.
And it's not great for the dog. I've seen lots of people walking their dogs where their dog is pulling and it's struggling to breathe.
Yeah. My partner works in a vet, and she sent a picture, which I won't disclose, but she sent a picture the other day of a dog that was absolutely embedded into a harness through pressure necrosis.
Really?
And it had to have skin grafts taken from its back end to cover up its shoulders. There's nothing wrong with a harness. We're not suggesting that harnesses do this and harnesses are the devil. This is obviously a case of neglect, but the harness rubs the areas where the dog's at. If the dog's pulling, if you want to put a harness on your dog and your dog's not pulling into it, fair enough. But you've got a lot of friction-related injuries. Also, it's not really good for your dog's joints pulling 24/7 all the time.
Yeah, and similarly, I've seen leads that have got like a bit of elastic that have got a bit of like a elastic on it to give way to the tension.
Absorption or something, like a shock absorber, basically.
And again, it's not great, is it? Because it's not dealing with the problem behaviour. It's not teaching your dog to walk to
I had a
heel.
bull lurcher come in on one of them in a harness, and the dog was dog aggressive, and to watch it, like, it was dangerous, but it was comical. Like, the dog was like reversing, lunging, springing and bouncing back, reversing, lunging and springing and bouncing back, and
that sounds like a dance.
And
move.
and you could blatantly see that the dog was seeing value in that. It was enjoying the process of launching forward and being sprung back. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a bit like the hokey cokey.
Yeah.
I don't think so. For Andy and his harness, I know that I certainly think this, and I'm pretty sure.
I don't think Andy's
No, it's an ick for Andy.
No, it's Andy. Andy wants the harness. So Andy's asking about the harness, right? Yeah. So I'm just going to say that we're not an ever say never sort of.
No, never, not at all.
Sort of team,
Never.
So,
Never. Yeah.
But
everything has its purpose.
Everything
and
has its place. Everything has its place. Do we have preferential equipment for certain situations? Absolutely. But if a harness works for you, Andy, if you want to have a harness, makes it more comfortable for you to walk your dog or anybody else, as long as you use it correctly, as long as your dog's getting the exercise, you're both happy. Crack on.
Okay, next ick we've got Angel. I love that name.
Yeah.
Angel
of Harlem.
Okay, thanks, Tim.
Nice.
That's
Nice. He'll be here all week.
That's all right.
Yeah.
That's all right.
That's the Dog Scholar's official jingle. Right. And Angel says, this is going to be a controversial one. Angel says, we paid £3,000 for our pedigree cockapoo.
Cool. Cool.
This is the new modern thing. When I was a kid, if you had a mixed breed, you called it a mongrel. It was a mixed breed.
I've got a mixed breed and I call him a mongrel.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not degrading. It is what it is. And to be honest, we haven't got the science in front of us, but the science shows that mongrels live a lot longer, happier, healthy lives.
Less inherent health problems.
Yeah, absolutely. But are they a pedigree? Are they worth £3,000? And are they pedigrees? No, they're not. They're not a registered pedigree breed.
It's worth what you're willing to pay for it, Angel.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
I have a big problem. I have a big problem with people charging excess amounts for any dog, regardless of whether it's a crossbreed or if it's a pedigree dog.
It drives more unethical breeding.
It really
doesn't
does.
Yes,
That
it
is my
does.
problem.
Yeah.
You get the greedy people, not the ethical breeders. Jamie's a very ethical breeder. My family's got one of Jamie's Labradors, which has got absolutely fantastic temperament, I must say,
Thank you,
Jamie.
mate. Thank you.
And I know that's down to Jamie's morals and ethics. But as soon as you start driving the prices of dogs up, then people just rub them greedy hands together. And I've said it before in previous series. Once you do that, you stop selecting what you're breeding for temperament and for longevity and for health, and you start looking at aesthetics and what sells. You've sold your soul to the devil, and it's one of the big problems why dogs are being overbred in the country as it is.
Yeah, I think if you don't want to pay £3,000 for a dog, don't pay £3,000 for a dog. Don't anybody pay £3,000 for a dog. You'll soon see the price of dogs drop.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same
That's
as any
it.
basic
Yeah.
economic principles. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Supply and demand. Bring the price down, the price will go down. But
Yeah.
as long as people keep paying £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 for a standard dog, that's what you're going to see. And
Yeah.
to be completely honest with you, with 13 million of them in the country, I'm not breeding anymore. The last litter
Yeah.
that I bred was the last litter that I will breed because of that very
Yeah.
fact. We've got enough. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? I can't really I just like the dogs that I breed. You know, they're nice,
Yeah.
they're sound dogs. We haven't bred loads of them anyway.
No,
They've
no.
gone to decent homes and I've had decent feedback on them. So,
Yeah.
but you want to keep the price high, keep paying high prices.
In lockdown, the prices of dogs went through the roof.
Ridiculous.
Didn't it? But I mean, the point here as well is that one about crossbreeds.
Yeah.
And are crossbreeds now becoming the new pedigree, the new fashionable dog? And this is a really interesting one because when you start breeding a dog for aesthetics, for how it looks, you can breed problems into the dog because you're not
Yeah.
thinking about their temperament
Yeah.
necessarily.
Well,
and
every
you see that with some of the bracky
Yeah.
dogs,
Well,
like
what you find-
French
yeah.
bulldogs and things, where they then can't breathe because the look that people prefer is that really short
Yeah,
snout.
yeah.
But then the dogs have got breathing problems and they've got health problems. So it is so important to think about both ethical breeding and also the kind of dogs that, the demand
Yeah.
that you want to drive. So, are you breeding a dog for the dog or are you breeding a dog because you think
I
it
would
looks
I would
cool?
like to say something a little bit controversial. Could I?
That's not like you, Danny.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say it anyway, and if it makes the final cut, it makes the final cut.
Could I? Well,
Okay.
I'm going to say it
Yeah,
anyway.
so
that is like you, Danny.
that was the biggest problem with dogs today was human beings breeding them to a human specification for aesthetics. And you only have to look at some of the major organisations that everyone's like, wow, this is great. And I'm going to say Crufts. You look at the German Shepherd that won Best of Breed in Crufts. That is an unhealthy dog that's going to be in pain already. That its back legs were absolutely terrible. But yet everyone's like, yay, Crufts, and they're giving this dog a rosette, and people are encouraged to breed from that and produce more of the same.
Because we should say that was the purpose of dog shows originally,
Yeah.
was to find the best
Victorian
best
folly,
to
wasn't
breed
it? Something
from.
to kill the time
And-
for people who had the
but
money and the time to kill.
That's why with breed specifications you get marked down if your dog
Yeah.
is neutered, for example, because
Yeah, yeah.
they were the
Yeah.
shows were designed to select
The
the
dogs
best
are
dogs.
And do you know what?
The
Do you know
dogs-
what?
Shows
the
were
dogs-
designed.
the
Do you know
shows
what?
were
Dogs are designed.
Do you know what
Yeah.
absolutely dumbfounds me? That's been brought to media attention for years now. Every year, especially the German Shepherd category, and it's still happening. That's still the look that they're preferring. It's not ethical in my opinion. We should always put welfare and health as a priority. Well, welfare, health, and temperament as a priority. I think things need to change.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's all we got time for this week. Great conversation, gents, as always. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, please do share it with a friend. And if they don't enjoy it, their dogs might.
Over to Danny for a final thought.
No one's going to argue our dogs mean the world to us. And I think what we've learned from this podcast today is if you want to maintain that relationship, a healthy, happy one for as long as possible, do everything you can to reduce the dog's likelihood to be stressed or anxious.
Fantastic advice.
See you next week.
Comes around.